ונזכחו לנו מהרה לאורו אור חדש על ציון תאיר ונזכחו לנו מהרה לאורו Shine your light on me. Help me to see what the world could be. Open our eyes to see. Open our hearts so that we can be free. אור חדש על ציון תאיר ונזכחו לנו מהרה לאורו אור חדש על ציון תאיר ונזכחו לנו מהרה לאורו
Beautiful. Thank you. During this time, many of us may feel alienated from people who are important to us. We may feel alienated from a country that expresses conflicting values. We may feel alienated from our synagogue community because of the inability to be together in person or the unknown direction that we're heading. We may feel alienated from relatives or friends who we can't be with, or may seem to have a different set of values and perspectives about what's happening in our country. And we may even feel alienated from the people closest to us because of stress or lack of connection that's been building for a long time. What do we do with this sense of alienation or disconnection? What we do with it makes all the difference in the ability to shape the world we want to inhabit going forward. In this week's Parsha, the people of Israel have traveled 3 days away from the mountain of Sinai towards the promised land. And they're already complaining. They had an incredible experience of God and connection through the exodus of Egypt and the revelation at Mount Sinai. They're fed by the manna that falls from the sky every day, giving them exactly what they need. And yet they feel alienated. Like us, their future is uncertain. They're living in a whole new world, and yet they resist God's presence. They lack a fundamental sense of trust. The text says in this week's Parsha, the riffraff in their midst were overwhelmed with desire, and the Israelites too wept and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There's nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look to." Moses heard the people weeping, every clan apart, each person at the entrance of his tent. And in Moses's eyes, it was evil. The people resist connection. They are struggling with the unknown in their journey in the wilderness. Why does this make God angry? Earlier in the Pesach story, we were introduced to a God full of compassion for his people. What is it about the people's response that's evil to Moses? In trying to understand the people's behavior after their experience at Sinai, the rabbis strive to interpret the verse, and they traveled away from the mountain of God as they traveled away from God. One midrash states that they traveled away from Mount Sinai gleefully, like a child who runs away from school saying, perhaps he's going to give me more commandments if we stay, more mitzvot. The people's desire to break the connection with God is understood as an avoidance of responsibility. They don't want to be obligated to the mitzvot. They want to do what they please. The 19th century rabbi known as the Nitziv has a different take. He says that the experience at Mount Sinai was so ecstatic, so connected, and even so pleasurable that the people couldn't even handle it. The experience of God at Sinai was so intense, even in a positive way, that there was a fear that if it happened again, the people would be consumed and they wouldn't be able to maintain a separate sense of self. And to complement this experience at Sinai, there are numerous midrashim that describe the taste of the manna as the blissful experience of mother's milk, where the infant is intimately connected without lacking anything. In the text, even Moses uses this nursing metaphor when complaining to God. He says, "Did I conceive this entire people? Did I bear them that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a wet nurse carries an infant?" Famous human development theorist Erik Erikson and psychoanalyst Melanie Klein speak about the nursing experience in early infancy as the navigation of the first developmental challenge that a person has to go through. Will they develop a basic sense of trust or mistrust with the world? The blissful experience of nursing, the closeness and connection with the parent, comes and goes with the parent's inability to be fully present physically or emotionally. Therefore, for the child, the experience of the greatest connection is also fraught with loss and desire for what they have in a given moment. How an infant navigates this dual experience shapes a basic orientation of trust that the world is a place that provides goodness, or mistrust that their needs can be met. So even though the people had an awesome experience of God's presence at Sinai, and even though they were sustained through the blissful experience of the manna, like a nursing infant child, that they couldn't fully trust that the connection would always be there. And therefore they resisted the connection and the intimacy that was present in the manna. Now, there's something appropriate about the resistance. The reality of a mother or a parent not always able to meet the needs of the child and reflect back their inherent goodness causes the child to wrestle with and hopefully gain a sense of their own inherent worth as they develop. The people of Israel also needed to find a sense of trust that they could care for themselves when the day came that the manna would not be present. They demanded meat, something that they would have to work to digest, something much more complicated than the nursing milk-like manna. Now, we do the same things in our relationships. We resist intimacy and connection because at the same time that we crave connection, it also hurts so much when others aren't present for us in the way that we need them to be. It's safer to rely on ourselves, to not trust that our community can support us, to not believe that we will ever be heard or seen by the people that we care about. And the confusing thing is that sometimes the most healthy thing we can do in relationships is to set boundaries, to ensure that other people's lack of presence or ability to respond doesn't cause us pain. But that is not what God's anger or Moses's reference to the people's evil is about. The evil was found in their complaint. We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Fish we used to eat free in Egypt? That's a serious rewriting of their history. There was nothing free about it. They were in bitter servitude in Egypt, and they created a fantasy, a picture of reality that supported the emotional struggle that they were feeling in the wilderness. They were already struggling with fear and anxiety about the future. They were feeling a natural sense of mistrust that is present in every intimate relationship with its foundations in infancy. But instead of being honest about their experience, instead of being real and vulnerable with their pain, they created a fantasy that justified their own sense of injustice with the situation. If they could believe that their servitude in Egypt was such a golden time, they could feel like their anger and frustration with Moses and God was valid. They could blame Moses and God. You are the one who took us out of a good thing and brought us to this desert hellhole. So friends, this is our challenge. Our challenge is to resist the natural tendency to validate our feelings and our pain by creating stories about who other people are and what they're doing to us. These stories keep us alienated and create division and alienation in others when we share them. It's natural that we struggle with trust in the love of our families and friendships, trust in our community to care about us, trust that in our country our voices can make a difference. But instead of giving up and stepping away in alienation, we have the ability and the opportunity to engage, to step forward with our truth, our pain and vulnerability, and with our love, to insist on the reality of our connections, to insist on our ability to invite the God presence into our lives. And when we do, we find that not only do our relationships have the ability to support us, but that we are an integral and significant part of creating the world that we want to see. Shabbat Shalom.